I've spent countless hours listening to the many episodes and archives of The Howard Stern Show. While this legendary program is now a husk of its former self and will likely go out with a whimper within the next decade, I personally think it was something very special in its heyday. Granted, the topics of discussion and the many guests that it featured may not have been everybody's cup of tea, but the variety is what helped set it apart. If he wasn't talking to celebrities, adult film stars, political figures, and other quotable notables, Howard was discussing the finest parts of life with members of the Wack Pack. The Wack Pack is a group filled with eccentric individuals from all walks of life. Their color, creed, and preferences, none of that really matters. They were all joined together by their unusual behavior and presentation. Simply put, it was a tamer freak show for the then modern audience. You've got your standout members like Beetlejuice, High Pitch Eric, Eric the Midget, Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf, and Elegant Elliot Offen, all of which are people I've covered in separate videos, so be sure to check them out. But there were calmer people in the crew too. Not all of them had to be swindlers, degenerates, or drunken buffoons. Crackhead Bob, despite his history and name, was one such individual. While yes, he had previously made many bad decisions in his youth, namely drug use, he ultimately suffered the consequences for his actions and became a better person for it. He was hard to understand due to crack-related strokes he had experienced prior to appearing on the show, but if you were able to look past his mush mouth, he was a genuinely kind and loving person. Now don't let me talking him up dissuade you from listening. I'm still gonna make snide and crass remarks like I'm known for, but I believe Bob deserves respect, even if he was well known for being near impossible to understand. In this video, we'll go over some of the many appearances of Crackhead Bob, at least what I was able to find through various archive channels from around the web. His story is a little sad, pretty funny, and far more well-rounded than you would likely expect. Crackhead Bob was born on the 23rd of August 1959 in New York, but his tale with the show began on November 11th, 1995. Howard Stern was doing his regular radio show, bragging and gloating about the imminent release of his latest book, titled Miss America. This bundle of papers was a follow-up to his previous release, Private Parts, which debuted in 1993. People were lining up outside Barnes & Nobles around the world, including New York City, eager to get their grubby little hands on the writings of their favorite shock jock. Howard had some of his guys out on the street, interviewing people who were not so patiently waiting in line for this legendary collection of paper and ink to be released to the public. While most of the people present had nothing interesting to say, the first person in line definitely had ideas to share, even if it was a tad difficult to understand what exactly he was saying. This individual had been waiting in line since 2 p.m. the previous day. His brain appeared to be fried from staying up for so long, among many other more pressing reasons. He wanted Howard to sign his copy of Miss America when he had it because it was such an amazing event.
No, there is no injunction.
Hey, Howard?
Yeah.
Talk to the first guy online. He's saying it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
All right.
Say hello to him.
2 o'clock in the
Hey, dude.
afternoon.
What's going on?
Hey, what do you say, man?
I'm doing okay.
You will love this book.
Yeah, what?
I promise you, you will not be disappointed.
Yeah. I'm gonna walk to your house and you could sign that.
What did you say?
I want you.
Upon hearing his speech impediment, Howard agreed to sign the man's book if his staff could safely transport him to the Stern studio. Gary Delabate, Stern's producer, mentioned that he had seen this individual a few times prior, and Howard seemed to kinda recognize him too, likely contributing to his agreement to allow him in the studio. Both of them were convinced that the man was suffering from cerebral palsy. Once this guy and a few other superfans made their way into the K-Rock studio, they were interviewed once more by a camera crew. This quick chat revealed the man's name was George Harvey, and he was a huge fan of Howard Stern. Given that this was the 90s and Stern was as popular as ever, it's no surprise that someone like George was a fan. Through this interview, we as listeners were informed that George was such a massive fan that he had been waiting in line for Stern's newest book since the previous day. The cold temperatures of the fall seasons weren't going to keep George away from his goal of owning a collection of pages written by Howard Stern. Howard grilled George about allegedly using his supposed cerebral palsy to get to the front of the line, in a totally joking manner of course, but George replied that it wasn't some kind of disability that was totally out of his control that caused him his problems, but rather that he had hit the pipe too many times.
Smart guy. That's it. Smart guy. Uses the CP thing. Sometimes I go to like lines and stuff and I just go, I gotta get in here, man. And they're like, what's wrong with you?
Move right ahead.
You got CP, right?
Yeah.
That's all you gotta do.
No, before I was drugs and then stoking, and now no more.
What?
Just say yeah.
He was smoking.
You were smoking weed?
Yeah.
No, not indeed. Stoking a pipe.
You smoked a bong?
Correct.
You were smoking
smoking
crack?
Yeah.
Smoking crack and he got messed up.
Oh.
Come
That's
on.
why.
George had a history of smoking crack, which for New York was probably not uncommon for the time. He was almost always first in line at Stern-related appearances and events because he was such a mega huge dedicated superfan. It's no wonder Howard and Gary recognized him when he was always popping up front and center at their signings and public shindigs. Howard asked George when he started smoking rocks. This was difficult for George to elaborate on because the damage done to his brain caused him to struggle with math, among other things. He would count to the first digit, stop, then start over for the next one. Through this method, it was deduced that he began partaking and sparking gravel somewhere around the age of 25. Alongside his difficulty computing numbers, he struggled with reading, writing, and the use of his hands was extremely limited. His right hand was mostly unusable, forcing him to be a lefty by circumstance. In fact, his entire right side gave him trouble, which created many mobility problems for him, such as needing to drag his uncooperative foot anywhere he went. George claimed that these problems just spontaneously started one day. He was normal, enjoying his crack rocks and subsequent erratic highs until one day he started talking the way he did. He went to the hospital, but there was unfortunately nothing they could do for him. The damage had already been done.
So, dude, you mean you were smoking a lot of crack,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you started talking like this?
Yep. No, all of a sudden.
Did they send you to the hospital? And shit?
So, yeah.
They did?
I was okay. I was just smoking, and all of a sudden, I don't know. All of a sudden.
Man.
Despite goofing on George for his condition, Howard did agree to sign both of his books for being such a dedicated lover of the show. He ended up not only getting Howard's signature, but the autograph of several people who were involved in the show. Quite the awesome gift, not gonna lie. The conversation continued to move along, mostly serving to give George grief about what ailed him through the means of sarcastic needling. Howard said he was sorry for assuming only certain racial demographics smoked crack, a joke you likely wouldn't catch him muttering today. There's nothing quite like cracking some jokes at the expense of an entire group of people while snickering at an addiction that took a major toll on a man's functioning, as well as their personal life. Through some mostly unintelligible muttering, George shared that he had 2 children and was previously married, but the relationship went up in flames after only 13 years. The unluckiest of numbers. At the time, his kids were aged 11 and 6, so he was actively getting high while his children were in his life. Pretty sad stuff. I have to wonder if this habit was something that he hid from his family. Imagine you have a family member who's a stand-up guy, does what he needs to do, takes care of those he loves, and then one day he comes home and he doesn't act the same, let alone talk or sound the way he did before. There is no possible way he could efficiently hide his struggle.
Do you have kids?
I would be
Did-
sorry
yeah.
too.
You
You
got
have
kids.
kids?
But now I'm a divorced now.
You're divorced?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long were you married?
Come on now.
Uh-oh. How many years were you married?
Come on.
Come on, man. You can do it. How many years were you married? Uh-oh. He's messed up with numbers. Go ahead. How many years? Go ahead. 5. 5 is 10. 13 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you count the thumb. I wasn't sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Continuing to divulge in the dirty details about his life, he said that he endured a series of strokes which were the biggest cause behind his problems, all of which came from his little habit. This also explains the limited use of his hands. He even claimed that most or all of his money was pissed away just so he could spark up.
And all of a sudden, you couldn't speak right.
Yeah.
It's almost like you had a stroke or something.
Dogs. Yeah.
You had a stroke?
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
1, 2, 3 times.
3
Three
strokes.
strokes.
1, 2, 3 strokes.
Yeah.
And what happened? 3 strokes.
Oh, Jack.
3 strokes and you're out?
Yo.
Oh, dude. Well, this is certainly the best anti-crack commercial I've ever heard.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is a
yeah.
mind
That
on
is.
drugs.
That
you know?
is.
George had previously worked for the District Council of New York City as a resilient floor coverer, part of a union and everything, all thrown in the toilet because he wanted to get high. Drugs are bad, dudes, not even once. Due to his previous addiction having destroyed most parts of his life and his need for a companion, George hoped that Howard would be able to hook him up with a dial-a-date. Howard rejected this idea because he didn't think he'd be able to locate a girl who would be willing to take him out for a little night on the town and maybe a little extra. It had been about 5 years or so since George had last gotten laid, and he really wanted something warm to insert himself into. A man needs what a man needs, you know? However, Howard inevitably agreed to look into this because he felt bad for him. It wasn't going to happen that day because there was so much going on regarding the book and whatnot, but he promised he'd get Gary on the job because Baba Booey knows how to get the ball rolling. George himself really wasn't much of a knockout, so he wasn't going to receive any flirtatious calls from supermodels, but there was the off chance that a few average-looking women with nice personalities would call, or maybe even a few hookers. Hey, at the point George was at, you gotta be thankful for what you can get, and things were finally starting to turn around for him.
Now you are living your life. You don't have a job or anything, and you want a date. I'm gonna do you a favor. I'm gonna put you on the date.
Okay.
I'm gonna try and get you a girl.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have Gary schedule the day when you come. Today it's too exciting. The book
Okay,
just went on
no,
sale.
no,
I got a
no,
lot. I got a
that's
Stuttering John stuff. Don
Can't
Cornelius.
stop now.
I can't stop now. I can't
For a
stop the whole show.
date, yeah.
Okay.
The chances of a woman even calling in are going to be slim. You understand? You're not going to get a beauty queen calling in.
Well.
If anything, we might even get some hookers. All right? So maybe I'll shell out a few bucks and get you laid. You hear what I said? It ain't going to be easy, Sal.
Yeah.
George's ailment not only affected his ability to compute numbers and efficiently communicate with other people, but it also affected his ability to process written text. The 2 copies of the book he received weren't even going to be read by him, but rather to him, because reading had become an ongoing issue in his life for, well, you know, I'm sure he put 2 and 2 together. By the end of this interview, it was finally revealed that people called George by a simpler name, Bob. It was because Bob had difficulties pronouncing his own name, and Bob was overall just an easier title for him to use, so it stuck. Granted, this part of his story is inconsistent because there's footage of him from later interviews where he says George just fine, so do with that information as you will. From that point forward, the Legion of Stern fans knew him not as George Harvey, but rather Crackhead Bob, the birth of yet another legendary whackpacker.
It's George, actually.
I can't say that, though.
You guys have never met before, right?
No, but his name is George. If you look at his...
Is it George? So why do you say your name is Bob?
Because he can't say George.
Oh, you can't say George?
No, I can say it, but you know.
It's easier to say Bob.
Yeah.
Say it. Say George.
Bob.
No, say George.
George Sarving.
George.
George Sarving.
It's better to say Bob.
As a matter of fact,
Yeah, change your name to Bob. That's
as a
smart.
matter of fact, my name's Bob, and I say George quite often.
Okay, very good.
Several months would pass before Crackhead Bob would return to the Stern studio. He made an appearance on July 24, 1996 to play Name That Tune, or rather Dame Dat Doon as Bob would call it. The game was simple. Bob has to sing a song and listeners have to guess what he's actually singing. What could possibly go wrong? Before Howard and his co-host Robin initiated the game, they pried at Bob a bit. They were curious if he had any recordings of his voice prior to his strokes. Unfortunately, Bob didn't know if there were any viable archives of how he used to sound before he smoked a little too much crack. Hey, it happens. Robin was blown away that Bob continued to hit the pipe after his first stroke, but Bob's mama didn't raise no quitter. Howard pointed out that despite Bob's right side being mostly unresponsive, his right arm was gradually raising as Bob entered the studio, wherein he had to push his own arm down as if it had a mind of its own. When asked about this, Bob said it was because he was nervous. My arms also raise and flail around freely when I'm stressed, so I get it. We've all been there, dude.
And even I noticed with your arm, like Dr. Strangelove, it creeps up and you have to smack it back down. And yeah. What is that all about? What goes on there? What happened? Your arm just creeps up on you?
Yeah, because I'm nervous now.
You're nervous.
The oldest.
When you're nervous, your arm goes up.
Yeah.
All right, and then what do? You take your hand and you push it down again? I see.
While discussing his arms and their partial lack of functionality, the camera focused on several new tattoos that Bob had recently gotten. He had the K-Rock logo, both Howard and Robin on his arms, sporting the insignia of the brand and people that he loved. I can't fault the guy for expressing himself with the available canvas that he had. Finally, after much deliberation, the show got on to the real reason they wanted Bob there. It was time for Dame Dat Doon. They had previously recorded a skit where Bob was supposed to be the nude lead singer for Van Halen. It should go without saying, but Crackhead Bob has an angelic but intense voice, with impeccable delivery. Howard joked about putting together a Crackhead Bob album. Man, I would own several copies if I could. That would be the fucking tits. Gary Daaaaats entered the studio with a piece of paper, struggling to look past his lips to see the tiny writing. Through his mostly inarticulate babbling, he shared that contestants would win a Schwinn home gym or tickets to see Kiss at Madison Square Garden. Or they could see the Warped Tour, but even Crackhead Bob seemed unenthused by that. Such a shame. He could have headlined their show. Moving along onto the game, the first caller eagerly listened to Bob attempt to sing Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones. This wasn't a hard one to guess, but the game was only going to get progressively more difficult from here.
See, I know this song.
I know that song.
Yeah, that was easy.
I guess the game gets harder as you go along.
The next caller tagged in, ready to tackle the next tune. This one was completely unintelligible. I feel bad for the contestant. The caller was unable to figure this one out. Same for everyone else in the studio, so they gave him a second chance. The next song was also just as tricky to decipher. Two callers failed to properly spot this song. I can't for the life of me figure out why. Turns out it was Maggie May by Rod Stewart. I'm just as surprised as you are. The next caller was hit with another impossible challenge. He of course failed, sarcastically guessing Stairway to Heaven. His guess would be about as good as yours or mine.
Sounds like Indians praying for rain, doesn't it?
Oh, boy.
That was fabulous.
That is fabulous.
That really was good.
That felt good.
Only dogs could hear the other end of that.
As expected, another contestant phoned in and tried their hand at the competition with the same amount of success as the previous bunch. This game was proving to be a Herculean challenge. If only this kind of sport was popular today.
That's it.
Ultimately, there were no big wins from the contest, but I suppose expecting anybody to complete an arduous task like understanding Crackhead Bob is something of a fool's errand. A tall task that doesn't need to be complicated by a second or third thought. But let's keep moving, shall we? One of the most noteworthy appearances occurred just under a year later, on August 15, 1996. Crackhead Bob and fellow Wack packer Fred the Elephant Boy, who was similarly unintelligible, were set to sing a song together on the radio for a contest. Howard had paired Bob and Elephant Boy up for a little gag project. He wanted the duo to collaborate on a music album, a cassette that could be purchased by his fans. Considering both men were nearly impossible to understand, this was the pairing of a generation, the makings of history. Bob and Fred the Elephant Boy were great friends, likely because they were both tricky to understand. This shared trait was the starting point of a long, fruitful friendship, leading them to participating in a variety of shows together. They were usually working hand in hand on different projects due to their speech problems, but Elephant Boy's mental acuity did exceed Bob's, as he was not intellectually disabled, but rather just suffered from a speech impediment. You know, come to think of it, there's been so many good Wack packers over the years that it's shocking that none of them have been paired up to be a buddy cop duo. Before the two sang together, Howard interviewed both of them, and fortunately for us, he devoted a particular amount of attention to Bob. It was revealed that Crackhead Bob had recently gone to Disney World. While that is just a thing that people tend to do, I can understand why Howard was so interested in this. Surely Bob would have quite the interesting and astute perspectives on the finer points of amusement parks. And, well, you know, the fact he had a lagging foot. He undoubtedly had to be pushed around in a wheelchair. Howard found this to be humorous because Bob pronounced it as a deal dare, the true technical name of the apparatus, despite what people might try to tell you.
Oh, I did, and
You had a wheelchair?
out there.
Oh, you had a wheelchair?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't,
Wheelchair again?
now, why did you... Could you say wheelchair again?
Out there.
All right. You had a wheelchair.
Everything begins with a D or a B.
A deal chair. A bill chair. A bill chair.
Bob had gone on a date with a woman named Shelley that he had met through the show. This woman was known for dating disabled people, burn victims, and even little people. Her thing just seemed to be disabilities. I mean, hey, there's gotta be somebody for everyone. Everybody's got some kind of type. With that being said, she was totally down for fooling around with Bob, at least eventually. Unfortunately for him, she had a boyfriend. This wasn't that big of an issue considering she was in an open relationship, but Bob wasn't happy about this. He wanted her all to himself. I get it. He was hoping for a relationship, not just fun and sex, but he got over it by the time the topic came up on the show.
Now, Crackhead Bob, something upset you about her. You found out that she had a boyfriend. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, why would that upset you? Why would you care?
Oh, no, I was just made.
She got looking for a relationship.
Were you looking for a
I
relationship?
don't know, it's all the same.
I told I have an open relationship.
Right, so she can go out with her.
I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, I mean, just because another guy likes her doesn't mean you
Oh,
can't.
no, I was just mad, though.
Are you mad at me?
No.
You know, guys get
I know.
Guys get so goddamn possessive.
They went bowling together, which is a stellar idea for a first date for a guy like him. I've got a sneaking suspicion that his limp and funky arm might have made this night out a little, awkward. They also went out for dinner, or they might have ate at the bowling alley, hard to say. Bob ordered a burger and onion rings, and his new lady friend was impressed that he was able to eat it and open a ketchup bottle without assistance. I bet watching him carefully open the condiment container got her all hot and bothered. I know I would be. He even showed her his eccentric way of tying his shoes, using his teeth. I gotta say, Bob knew all of the tricks of the trade when it came to courting women. Ladies and gentlemen, I advise you to take notes.
Crackhead Bob, what happened when you went and ate the hamburger? Did you have problems eating the hamburger?
I don't know.
Well, did he eat okay?
Yeah, I thought he was fine. He opened the ketchup bottle by himself, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you had to be proud of him.
Yeah, well, I asked him how he was going to do it, and he's like, watch this.
Right.
Oh, and
One
then-
hand.
One hand.
And I also saw him tie his shoes with his teeth.
Shelley wouldn't put out because it was 1996 and she allegedly feared of contracting AIDS from bumping uglies with Bob. Now, be real with me here. Why in the fuck would Crackhead Bob of all people have AIDS? She also didn't call him after the date, but that did not deter Bob, since he tried calling her business to get a hold of her, but her employees couldn't understand what he was trying to say. The reason she didn't call him is because she didn't have his phone number, as it would be an entire process to get it from him. You know, the whole counting up and whatnot. At this time, it really didn't seem like she was as interested in him as she initially let on. Hopefully, this wasn't another case of a person abusing the show's generosity, and most importantly, Bob. He vowed to get his number to her so they could eventually have some phone sex. What I'd give to hear that play out. It would have to be frickin' hysterical. They were gonna take this day to go out and get to know each other better once the appearance was over and done with. Her plan was to take him to meet some members of Electric Frankenstein, who I'm sure Bob was elated to meet. However, before this day of joy and romance could commence, Bob and Elephant Boy had some work to do. After Bob's outing was detailed, at least to the best of his ability, the song he and Elephant Boy would have to perform was revealed. Mockingbird by Carly Simon and James Taylor, a duet which is essentially two overlapping vocals intertwining in real time. Kind of a tricky song to master. Elephant Boy and Crackhead Bob were probably the best suited people to ever attempt this track. Overall, it went about as well as you would expect. Laughs were had, even by the featured Wack Packers. Bob kept saying ding after every word sung by his musical partner, instead of yeah, the lyric required by the song. Poor guy just couldn't hold on to the simplest of tasks, but he tried.
Mock,
Then,
ding,
then,
board,
then,
yeah,
yeah.
mockingbird.
Everybody,
As you heart is gonna find me a mockingbird. And if the mockingbird don't sing, he got to find me a diamond ring. And if the diamond ring was sung, it's effective as of my, and that's what keep on telling everybody.
Let me get Crackhead. Keep singing. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Keep going, Crackhead.
Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Mockingbird is acting good.
Lost the ability to read.
All right, listen to me.
The following day on August 16th, Howard played another song recorded by Bob and Elephant Boy, this time being I Got You Babe by Sonny and Cher. I need this song played at my funeral. I don't care what anybody says to the contrary. This shit is majestic.
Nice music, too.
They say we're young and we don't know. Won't find out until we grow.
I got you and you got me, and I got you and you got I.
Babe,
I got you, babe. I got you, babe.
Some months later, on January 27, 1997, Bob graced the radio waves with his dulcet tones yet again. The world stood still as everyone attempted to de-scramble whatever he was saying. Tommy Chong of the legendary comedy group Cheech and Chong was looking for a new Cheech. And what better addition to a pot-smoking comedy routine than a man who has had an intimate on and off relationship with crack? Bob was clearly the best candidate for such a role. See for yourself.
All right, say this for me. Say, hey, I want to be Tommy Chong's partner.
I want to be
Tommy Chong's partner.
One more time.
Say, hi, it's Crackhead Bob.
Bye. One more time. Bye, Bob.
And I want to be Tommy Chong's partner.
And I want to be
Tommy Chong's
partner.
In the movies.
In the movies.
Tommy had to settle for calling in because he couldn't make it to the studio. Contractual obligations coupled with coming down from whatever nefarious narcotic he might have popped or smoked that morning. It happens. Since he and his comedy partner had experienced a falling out, Tommy wanted to recapture the success of the classic Cheech and Chong film series with a new film called Best Buds. But in order to do this, he was going to need someone who he could bounce off of effortlessly, alongside possibly getting stoned with. Howard had a selection of people he could have recommended for the show, such as Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf, but Bob seemed to be a good fit. He was naturally funny, or as naturally as a drug-induced stroke can be, and he was more than willing to jump through a few hoops for the show. Howard instructed Bob to exchange some dialogue with Chong to get a feel for how their chemistry was. Bob was, as expected, mostly misunderstood. Tommy was impressed by Bob's speaking ability, as among stoners an eloquent manner of speech and flexible tongue are important factors. The two began the audition, wherein Bob had to pretend to be Cheech in a conversation. Honestly, Bob did far better than you'd likely expect. Tommy seemed to be entertained or impressed, but that might have been him saving face for the camera. I personally think Bob had far more talent than Tommy, but I'm certainly not the arbiter of stoner humor.
Okay, hey Cheech.
Hey, Cheech, who you?
What's happening?
I'm okay.
Okay, listen, man, I'm looking for some good weed. You know where I can score some good weed?
Oh, I can take the date, baby. I can.
I want whatever you've been smoking, man.
I want that. A lot though. Not a little, a lot.
Despite being a cunning linguist, Bob's audition just wasn't enough. Tommy still wanted Bob and other listeners to call his 900 number so he could properly archive, document, and review submissions for this film, as he was convinced this was the best method for finding his replacement Cheech. I think having a former addict with a funny speech impediment just thrown into your arms is a fantastic run of good luck, considering the type of media he was hoping to produce. You really can't ask for much better. Granted, Tommy was hoping to produce a movie centered around weed humor rather than just general drug humor, but I'm sure Crackhead Bob would certainly get down with sparking up a J. Howard did his own audition bit with Bob to help him sell his character a bit better. It went about as well as the previous one, but I admire Howard for trying so hard to get Bob some work. What a loving, well-intentioned friend that totally wasn't being condescending the entire time.
Hey man, what are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah. Hey man, why don't we go buy some weed?
Oh, baby, I want to weed too.
Right.
Hey, Bob, you're answering too fast, man.
No, yeah. I gotta act like you're stoned, all right?
Okay.
All right.
He doesn't remember.
All right, here you go. Hey, man.
What's going on, baby?
There you go.
Hey, you looking at me like I'm a girl. Maybe we better go out and find some chicks.
I think so, baby.
Tommy gave Bob a little bit of friendly criticism, saying that Bob was too quick to respond, as somebody who was under the influence of the devil's lettuce would take longer to respond to questions, which is a fair point. He's got to convince not only Tommy, but the audience of his acting ability. Can't have him raising any potential doubts regarding his sobriety, or lack thereof. Bob had to all but beg to get Tommy to honestly consider him for this flick, but ultimately Tommy didn't take him up on his pleas.
I think me and you will be a page of what we're gonna do. Okay?
What do you think?
Well, I think it'd be better as a two Cheech than someone you'd send out to buy something for you, for sure.
That's right.
Tommy's film did eventually get made, but it was never released. There was a legal battle regarding the ownership of the movie, but from what I was able to gather from my research, it allegedly was a steaming pile of wet shit. Maybe if Tommy brought on Crackhead Bob, a classically trained individual with a history in the entertainment business, the film would have done well and both would have had many great successes. But hey, shit happens. Howard had dabbled with films and short bits and gags. He totally could have fronted the money for some low-budget short film centered around Bob and his antics, or at least something along those lines, but that would also make too much sense. I mean, he was only a staple of a growing radio and television service that had very few content restrictions, so why not create something with Bob? He used him for other Howard TV productions, so what was there to lose? I don't know about you, but I find media centered around eccentric people to be particularly enthralling, and I have no doubts that Bob would have made a phenomenal on-screen personality. I mean, come on. Wouldn't you watch a show where the protagonist is this eloquent? I'd be on the edge of my seat.
I swear I'd go see that movie. Tommy Chong
Wouldn't anybody?
and Crackhead Bob.
That Bob. Oh, baby.
He can't even say his name.
That Bob. Come on now.
What?
You said it. Say it again.
That Bob.
Yeah, there you go.
Bob?
Yeah. Crackhead Bob.
That Bob.
Pretty unimportant, but during this appearance, Bob was wearing a Scores t-shirt. This is a notorious gentleman's club in New York City, widely known for its clientele, which has included celebrities, politicians, and crooks. All basically the same thing, I suppose. It has a history of corruption, including ties to organized crime and even prostitution. The business was only discovered to have women selling their services in 2008, which means they likely had the side hustle going on for years prior. Because of this, I can't help but imagine Bob getting his weasel grease because he knew Stern. But hey, he was living his best life. I think I'm gonna need some soap to thoroughly scrub this from my brain. Another interesting excerpt from this same interview on January 27, 1997 happened when the Jesus Twins made their first appearance on the show. These two were talentless, spastic, loud morons who wanted to make it big in the entertainment industry by means of putting out terrible music and equally as shitty videos to accompany them. Bob was still sitting at the long desk, microphone pointed at his mouth, waiting for an opportunity to say something while the two miscreants yammered and yapped, not giving him an opportunity to really speak his mind. The twins immediately insulted Bob as they sat down at the long desk, telling him to get out and that his interview was over. These literal whoos should have shown respect to the legend himself. During this interview, Howard asked Crackhead Bob if he liked the Jesus Twins, and to nobody's surprise, he said no. Bob had the exact same opinion of the Jesus Twins as literally everybody else in the world. The terrible twosome spit back, talked their usual brand of shit, and Bob threw it right back at him.
Yo, Crackhead, why don't you leave? The interview's over.
Oh my God.
Oh, wait a second. Let Crackhead can sit there. Come on, Crackhead.
Get out of here. What do you think, I'm Captain Jennings calling you up, kissing your ass for a phone call? Get out of here.
No, you.
Come on, douche. Come on, douche. With your tongues up.
Yeah.
No, we'll have a fight between Crackhead Bob and the Jesus.
Guys, you don't want to get into a fight with Crackhead Bob, trust me. Bob, you like these guys?
No.
Shut up, retard. Let's get...
No, you!
I have no time for your game.
Bob, easy.
I'm getting out of here.
Bob, easy.
I got security paid. You want me to kick your ass?
The ongoing conversation was making Bob's blood boil. Howard asked him what was going on. Bob said he was going to be cool. Something tells me that his inner rage was ready to burst out. Keeping his short fuse under control had to be a burdensome feat, and I applaud him for that. The twins followed this by arguing that Bob wouldn't be able to understand their music because he was intellectually disabled. Therefore, their work was far too complex for his feeble mind. Later on in the discussion, their god-awful music was played for everybody to judge. This day holds the world record for the most radios turned off during a single segment at once. Trust me, I know things. Howard paused the track, asked if he could give some constructive criticism, and one of the twins began yelling at people in the room who were laughing at their magnum opus. But Bob wasn't going to let them cause a scene, grabbing onto one of them so he could easily drive them into the ground.
Can I say something?
Douchebag, you think I'm Melrose Larry Green? I'll kick your ass.
Wait, easy. Sit down. Guys, relax.
Eventually, Gary and Bob had to share a mic, and Bob had to be suffocated with vile buoy breath. That's arguably a worse punishment than listening to the Jesus Twins discography, or the electric chair. You might think I'm exaggerating, but I challenge you to breathe in Gary's breath. That shit'll make your nose hairs burn away. The ongoing saga of Crackhead Bob would continue on March 26, 1997. Bombing his audition with Tommy Chong wasn't going to hold Bob back. He had a long, exciting life ahead of him. He was making appearances, being featured in live shows and Stern-related events, and overall was making quite a name for himself. Granted, he couldn't say the name, but he was doing good nonetheless. Because of this, he was hoping that the Stern Show would plug some of his upcoming dates, but Howard wasn't too keen on doing that if he wasn't getting anything out of Bob. Which, I mean, that is fair. It is a business after all. As such, Bob moseyed his way into the studio, bringing along a woman named Nina who he claimed to be his girlfriend. What a fantastic development for him, considering his ailments. The show's hosts and staff were betting that his love interest was going to be 900 pounds or really ugly, because they didn't believe Bob would be able to pull chicks. They really should have expected more from him. He was a player, damn it.
Coming up, Crackhead Bob's girlfriend.
We'll meet Crackhead Bob's girlfriend and Crackhead Bob.
That's it.
Right after these, where he's got a girlfriend.
I can't believe this.
I say she weighs.
There's got to be some kind of gimmick.
I say she weighs 900 pounds. What do you guys say?
She's attractive. What are you going to say then?
I don't think that's a...
There's no chance.
She's definitely not svelte.
But she's... Oh, you've seen her?
No.
Oh.
He's guessing.
All right.
Honestly, I think he did quite well for himself. Most people wouldn't do half as good, but I think it's also safe to assume that she was only drawn to him because of his ties to the show, but I'll let you come to your own conclusion. They had known each other for a little while and were already planning on moving in together, despite Nina having signed a lease where she agreed to be the only person staying at her residence. But hey, you know, love is a powerful force to be reckoned with, and some legal document doesn't mean shit when you're bunking with a celebrity, right?
You guys are an official couple?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
And true to that, I'm gonna do your house.
We're gonna move in together.
Yeah.
Oh yeah?
Oh yeah.
But my landlord doesn't know that yet.
Let me do.
Yeah.
Why, your landlord would have a problem with that?
I don't know.
Well, I signed a lease saying I would be the only one there.
The topic naturally moved on to the more pertinent questions. How did these two lovebirds meet? Nina and Bob met each other at a topless bar, where Nina was a waitress. Ah yes, the finest location for attracting a mate. Bob, of course, was a patron of this establishment because he liked watching ladies gyrate their hips and swing their knockers around. Nina noticed him in the back with his headphones on and struck up a conversation with him, claiming to be unaware of his notoriety. He made the first move on Valentine's Day, bringing her some candy that he purchased at 7-Eleven. This did not offend her and actually warmed her heart, as nobody else had thought about her on that day, brightening up the special day for her. He brought her along to the premiere of Private Parts, the film adaptation of Stern's first book, on March 7th of that year. In doing so, he informed her of how deep his infamy went. Bob and Nina finally had their first kiss on March 14th, 1 month after they started dating. The restraint they showed is actually commendable. Despite the relationship being new and fresh, they got matching tattoos within 2 months of being together, a tribal heart with wings. Hers was located below her navel, while his was on the center of his chest. When it was time for Howard to introduce the audience to Crackhead Bob and his girlfriend, Howard immediately called her fat, which was why she was a waitress at the topless bar and not a dancer. He started joking that if she lost 25 pounds she wouldn't be with Bob, who of course continued to take the needling like a champ. It didn't matter what Howard said, he was just happy to sit in for the show. His consistently good mood and caring demeanor really set him apart from other guests.
Evidently, it's the real deal. They got matching tattoos and everything.
Oh boy, he found a soulmate.
Gary said she's a live wire because she was pulling her pants down, and she works in a strip club, but she's not a stripper because she's too fat to be a stripper.
You know she's fat now.
Well, that's what Gary just told me.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
he
you
let it slip
shouldn't have
down.
gotten any
we're gonna find that anyway.
preview.
I got a preview.
Nina kept stroking Bob's arms while he giggled away as Stern continued to tell Nina that she wasn't a hog, but she was definitely chubby. You know, the kind of stuff that women really want to hear. It was just a loving radio family for the masses to enjoy. This was probably the happiest anybody had ever heard or seen Bob. When discussing their story, it was revealed that Bob would walk an hour and a half to the strip club because he couldn't drive and he limped due to his right side being uncooperative. The guy was lonely and wanted to get a boner with other dudes. Such a dedicated man. Bob's dedication to ideas appears to have been pretty strong, as he wouldn't drink alcohol when he was at the nudie bar. Most people go there to get a buzz among other things, but he stuck to cola. I'm guessing his will to avoid toxins was something he adopted after crack. Stern seemed convinced that Nina was only with Bob because of his ties to the show, which I understand his point of view, but it also felt like needless grilling. Regardless of Nina's purpose for initially getting with Bob, the two seemed happy, especially our hero. Despite what Howard said, Bob and Nina were good at arguing against this, which was quite the surprise from Bob.
Did somebody say to you that's Crackhead Bob from the Howard Stern show?
He has it tattooed. He showed everybody his tattoos.
Yeah, but did he say he was Crackhead Bob from the Howard Stern show?
He's Crackhead Bob.
No,
So you knew he was a guy on the radio.
First he acted normal.
You sound like Yoko insisting that she didn't know who John Lennon was.
Because
Right? Don't you? You know Yoko used to say she didn't know who John Lennon was?
I know who he is.
I know you know who John Lennon is, but I'm just saying Yoko used to say she didn't know who the guy from the Beatles was.
Have you ever listened to the show?
Honestly, no.
No?
Not until him. Now, 'cause
Right.
I was sleeping. I didn't have to be at work till 11:30.
I see. So you would sleep late.
Yeah.
All right.
We can deduce from this that he took his relationships very seriously. He loved this woman and he was going to defend her honor. From what Nina shared, Bob was the best man she had been with, as her previous relationships were too awful to discuss. I think it's wonderful that Crackhead Bob is a kind-hearted man who wasn't ruined by adversity. But despite how good the relationship was, he still couldn't pronounce her name. Unfortunately, that was something that proved difficult for him, which the show of course found very entertaining. Moving forward, it was revealed that Bob had difficulty maintaining stiffies as the relationship continued to blossom. Nina thought it'd be a smart move to share the intimate details about the functionality of her man's penis. Don't ever talk about your lover's fun bits on the radio. It's not a very considerate idea. Nina's mom even called into the show during this discussion and got brought into it. Meanwhile, Howard called Bob gay because he couldn't keep it up with a girl, just what his future potential mother-in-law needed to hear. Nina was actually lucky enough to have met Crackhead Bob's kids. His children were a sensitive topic for him, something he'd avoid talking about on the air due to how it affected him emotionally. Bob's ex-wife called in, furious that a woman she didn't know had met her children, wanting to know how and when the meeting took place.
Is this Mrs. Crackhead Bob?
This is the ex.
Ex-Mrs. Bob.
Right.
Go ahead.
Bob?
Yes.
Does he know who I am?
Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, good luck in your life.
Okay.
Don't come over here.
For what?
Because, you show up here with this girl. I don't know who she is. She says, oh, I met his son. How'd you meet my son? Riding past the house to say hello?
Yeah, this 5 minutes. This 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
What's wrong with that?
5 minutes.
From what I was able to put together, Bob didn't live terribly far from his ex, and he went out of his way to introduce his current partner to his kids. I can see both sides of the argument here, but it wasn't necessary to drag some drama onto the radio, especially with a guy that could barely even talk. But this was not going to deter him. Bob cleared the air, stating that the interaction was brief, just about 5 minutes, so what was the harm? He took her hostility personally. This guy, for all of his faults, definitely loved his kids, and he was not going to take any bullshit in regards to how he treated them. His ex replied that Bob's involvement with the show, coupled with the crude discussion that they had earlier, was traumatizing to his children, particularly his daughter, who was fully aware of his antics. At one point, he gave his daughter a CD as a gift, and he signed it as Crackhead Bob. I get why his ex was unhappy about this, but the drug abuse and eventual strokes changed him. He didn't have the exact same mental faculties that he had before. People change in all kinds of ways, for better and worse. By the end of the call, she claimed that she only wanted to congratulate him on his success, but that was nullified when she took issue with him trying to interact with his own children, solely because he had a new woman in his life. To be honest, she sounded like a stuck-up bitch. Both Crackhead Bob and his girlfriend Nina would return to the studio together yet again on October 10, 1997. They were actually part of a group appearance featuring Bob, Nina, Captain Jenks, and Kenneth Keith Collenbach. Quite the motley crew. Bob was a tiny bit scruffier than he was the last time he spoke to Howard, sporting some facial hair. His time with Nina was likely changing him as a person, as he rarely skipped shaving. Bob and Nina were actually engaged. Sorta. He didn't give her a ring, at least not yet, but rather suggested they should pick out a ring for her to get. He dropped to one knee and told her he wanted to marry her. With no hesitation, she said yes. Howard inquired about the wedding date, which was not currently set. Bob was actually hoping that Howard would wed the both of them. I mean shit, I think it'd be quite the honor to be wed by Howard or to have the power to wed someone like Bob. In reality, they didn't have the money necessary to pull off the ceremony, so perhaps if Howard was involved, he'd be able to take care of everything. Nina's motivations did start to seem pretty questionable here, at least to me.
Oh, yeah, Crackhead, that is your fiancée. She is beautiful.
Huh?
She's beautiful. I know. When are you going to get married?
In a while. I'm waiting for you to marry you.
What?
I want you to marry me. I mean, you.
I don't want to marry you. Let her marry
Is
you.
he proposing to you? He's all confused.
What is her name again?
Nina.
Nina. Can you say Nina?
Dina.
Dina.
Since their last visit, likely through some means of satanic black magic, Bob's penis began cooperating with him, thus allowing him to resume plowing his lover. Things like that are kind of important, you know, and the show's many listeners just had to know that Bob could efficiently use his tallywhacker once again. The current status of his wedding tackle was of the utmost importance to everyone. The topic of Nina's newest profession came up, as she had recently quit being a waitress at the topless bar. At this point, she was a dance instructor, which intrigued the show's hosts. Bob and Nina got down with their bad selves in order to prove whether or not Nina had the makings of a varsity dance instructor. Who cares what she did though? I just wanted to see Bob throw it back. This segment was unfortunately coupled with footage of Bob sucking on her toes. You fuckers better enjoy this video. The shit you all put me through will leave me with scars on my brain till the end of my days. The most remarkable part of this interview, other than the bumping, grinding, and toe-sucking, was how everybody continued to tell Nina she was fat. From every archive I've checked, this was her last appearance on the show. She might have been scared off by all the fat comments, or maybe her bullshit charade of being a loving girlfriend who just so happened to have her hand out ultimately shit the bed, leading her to exit Bob's life. This was probably the best case scenario. Nobody needs a human leech in their circle. All Bob really needed was some good friends and some airtime on the show. I mean really, what else does a man need? But let's take a step away from the chronology of his narrative to discuss his dedication to making people smile. He was more than willing to put on a show for Stern's audience, whether it be an in-person appearance in the recording studio or a gag to garner public response. For example, on August 16, 1997, Bob visited Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee to play a little prank on tourists and locals. Mike Ganji, one of the show's staffers, dressed Bob up in a cheap Elvis costume and had him sit at a folding table on the sidewalk, claiming to be Elvis's cousin. Passerbys could stop, chat with him a bit, and learn about the deep lore of the Presley family. It should come to no surprise that he was mostly unintelligible, and some of the locals were understandably less than impressed, but hey, it was a joke. Instead of conversing with who they were told was a member of the Presley clan, Elvis's fans resorted to quizzing Crackhead Bob about various bits of Elvis trivia. They must have immediately known something was off when they saw him. I just can't fathom why. Some people even asked him to sing for them, because I guess a recurring trait in the Presley family is the ability to sing. I don't really know how this is a measure of his authenticity, but I suppose I'll allow it. In a stunning display of their ignorance and stupidity, an English woman approached Crackhead Bob to investigate the legitimacy of his blood relation to the king of rock and roll. When she couldn't understand him, she accused him of being a foreigner when she herself wasn't even from the US. The irony was almost palpable.
How can you be a relation to Elvis? You can't even give us the name of an auntie or anybody.
There. Always. Then.
Well, we can't even understand you. You're not an American. You're not American. No. You're not American. No way. That's bloody rubbish. You're not American. I would tear that down if I were you before you get assaulted by the rest of the true Elvis fans.
Apparently, it's against the rules to be an Elvis impersonator at Graceland. This resulted in Bob being removed from the property. Speaking of impersonators, some actual Elvis wannabes confronted Crackhead Bob about his bogus claim of relation to their idol. I guess dressing up as a man who dated underage girls and who also died on the shitter due to taking drugs was just something only they were allowed to do, not disabled people. How incredibly divisive and unkind of them. But this wasn't the only way he was willing to bring laughs to the show's many listeners. Bob was actually no stranger to crank calls. He worked with Sal and Richard, Howard's phony phone call producing cronies, to pull pranks on unsuspecting people. Their usual bit was a Jack and Rod show, where they'd bring on a low-level, relatively unknown worker from the entertainment or book-writing industry, then slap them across the face with jokes via a fake radio show. Bob attempted to impersonate Kirk Douglas, but his attempts to sound different were usually unsuccessful. That's fine, because at least he guaranteed results.
Yes, you and your son.
Okay.
We saw you recently on something, and you're still just absolutely marvelous.
Okay, but I want my duck.
Your son.
My penis. My penis.
My penis.
Yeah, yes.
We admire you greatly.
Thank you.
You know what? He's one of the greatest actors of all time.
Thank you. I like your tits.
You like what?
I like the Tootsie.
He once called a Chinese takeout restaurant and they got annoyed at his way of speech. I'll let their exchange of dialogue do the talking for me.
No, I want to know.
Chicken and shrimp combination.
And Tiki my name.
Oh my God.
Tiki my name. Come on. I want to eat and you're fucking me. You're fucking me. You're fucking me now.
But this wasn't everything. He was actually a pretty active participant in on-the-air games, such as Turkish Millionaire. He played this game on January 14th, 2000, where he had the opportunity to win a whopping 1 million Turkish smackaroos. For him, any amount of currency was a win. At this time, in the year 2000, $1 US was the equivalent of 620,000 Turkish lira, meaning that in reality he could only win just under $2 US. Ooh, the big bucks. To take a score, all Bob had to do was answer 3 simple questions. What year is it? After a bit of struggling, Bob answered the question correctly. What day is after Sunday? Bob had further difficulties with his question, answering Monday after doing some quick math. Who is buried in Grant's tomb? This was a hard question, so Bob had to call in a lifeline to Gary the Conqueror. I know you guys probably want to hear his old name, but YouTube isn't as fun these days. This was proving to be quite the hard one to crack, as even Gary had difficulty figuring it out. Howard had to settle for making the question multiple choice. After running through the answers a few times, Bob finally settled on Grant, landing him a whopping 1 million Turkish lira. Gotta admit, that is pretty fucking awesome. Lastly, before we get back to the story, Bob was present at the Artie Lang roast. He had the opportunity to spit out some harsh jokes at the expense of a then-popular comic with a crippling heroin addiction. Crackhead Bob actually made the most sense out of all of the people there, and he actually beat his own addiction compared to his contemporaries at the time. Bob's story continued to push forward despite the many trials and tribulations the world threw at him. Through his adventures in the entertainment business, he was making many connections and friends. One of these friends was Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf, ranging from live shows to fan meetups and probably a healthy amount of extracurricular drinking, though I would assume that Hank drank the lion's share, but that was pretty much just the usual for him. In 1998, Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf and Crackhead Bob appeared at a WWF event. Hank was totally sloshed, a typical drunken mess as you likely would expect. Bob was ecstatic, powered by the high energy in the room, with the lights and all the attention focused on him. He let the crowd know just how he felt. He wasn't going to take anybody's shit anymore. He was his own man and he could not be controlled. The two were present to help introduce a series of characters who were all outcast, much like them in a fictional sense. At least Hank and Bob weren't offended when they were being used. In 1999, the duo were present at another Stern-related show. Hank had been cutting back on his drinking for very obvious reasons, but this was causing him to experience periodic seizures. Unfortunately, one occurred during a live event. Bob came to his assistance, at least to the best of his ability, and stayed close by while his friend experienced a medical emergency. He wasn't going to leave until he knew his buddy was okay. On April 19, 2001, Crackhead Bob was visiting the studio with Hank. Bob was upset with Stern's staff as anytime he called they'd ignore him or hang up entirely, which he felt was blatantly disrespectful. He was trying to get booked on the show because of his various goings-on, and he believed it was necessary for him to get airtime to talk about his business ventures, and to promote any upcoming developments. Instead of calling Gary, Bob would call Doug Goodstein, who didn't handle booking for the show. Apparently, he had been calling for 2 whole days. I'm shocked he didn't try to do anything else to get on. He probably could have just showed up and they would have let him sit in for the news or something. Hank was not deterred by Bob's demeanor, as he was already celebrating his birthday a day early by drinking. You know, the usual. Howard had heard that Bob sounded particularly awful when he was on the phone, like there was a bunch of background noise that managed to make him even harder to understand. Stern asked Bob if he was on speakerphone, which Crackhead Bob confirmed, but he claimed he only had his phone on speaker because he was also on the toilet. This flabbergasted the show's host, inquiring as to why he chose to make a call while making number 2. Bob replied that it was because it takes him an hour and a half to dump. Turns out dropping stool is an entire process for him, requiring his undivided attention. Stern would later play a clip of one of Bob's phone calls. I honestly don't believe that him taking off speakerphone would have made much of a difference here. He's admittedly next to impossible to decipher in person, so throwing a shitty phone mic into the mix was only going to make it worse.
Bob Howard, that's Bob. I want you to be on to go.
And he wonders why nobody books him. Nobody knows what he's saying.
Okay? When you come in, call up me, okay?
When you come in, call up me.
Okay, brother.
Nobody even knows it's really you.
Don't.
Bob Harvey. That's Bob.
I'm that Bob.
When you come in, I called up yesterday, now I'm calling up today. Yes or no? It's when you come in, call up me, okay? Okay.
Crackhead Bob's teeth were more radiant than usual for this visit. He received veneers to correct the modifications to his maw that were perpetrated by copious amounts of smoked crack. Hank revealed that he also used to smoke crack, which gave him and Bob yet another thing to converse about and bond over when they weren't on the hot seat. Bob's professional career continued to blossom, blooming into something much larger than he could have ever possibly imagined. The Stern Show introduced many opportunities for Crackhead Bob to turn a profit, be it from appearances, events, games, and even business ventures like commercials. Financial and personal gratification was not in short supply here. For example, he was featured in an anti-drug PSA. For once, he was going to be able to use his ongoing difficulties to send a message to America's youth, to help encourage them to keep their lives on the straight and narrow.
A, B, D, D, E, F, D, H, I, D, D, Federal, NATO, D, 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 A, D, 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 B, D, 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 E, F, D.
I honestly believe that this got the message across quite well, but I'm curious as to why they said his name is Bob, when it's actually George. They wanted to use him for a PSA, but they couldn't even bother to get the star's name right? Pretty suspect if you ask me. Just goes to show that maybe the industry doesn't really give that much of a shit about representing those who have been hurt by narcotics, instead preferring to omit details and misrepresent the entire truth in hopes of gaining more funding thanks to his notoriety. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic. I don't know. Bob used humor as a coping mechanism for his disability when he was on the show, but he wanted to help people when he could. He knew that when he talked he sounded funny, and he figured that maybe he could use his afflictions for something good. If he could lead by example by living with his mistakes, maybe he could help someone in need make a good decision. Sometimes helping people is better payment than any amount of currency. Integrity is one of the most important factors of someone's character. His character was important to him, and in 2001, he announced that he would be taking a bit of a break from appearing on The Stern Show so he could spend more time with his family and rebuild himself to become a better person. He was surrounded by drugs and alcohol at many of his appearances, and he just could not risk the temptation. While he would appear again a few months later to give a speech during Howard's last K-Rock show, Bob would begin to appear less and less as the years went on. Many years later, on November 23, 2006, Bob attended a Wack Packer-only Thanksgiving, held by Marianne from Brooklyn. Nobody went to pick up Crackhead Bob from his humble abode, leaving him to walk the entire way. Somehow, through the means of his intermittent low functioning, Bob got lost twice while hobbling around New York to find Marianne's home. The attendees of the get-together were Crackhead Bob, obviously. Due to his condition and laborious walking, he didn't bring anything with him other than his presence. According to Marianne, it took him 3 hours to get to her house. High-Pitch Eric, a rotund con man whose high-pitched voice has haunted the dreams of Stern fans for decades. Additionally, this cheap fuck did not bring anything with him. Fred the Elephant Boy, who brought a cake that said a Wack Pack Thanksgiving. Somehow the people who made the cake didn't think to correct his grammatical error. Siobhan, a transgender Wack Packer who had recently lost their virginity, who supplied some wine for everyone to enjoy. And Eddie the Produce Guy, an individual known for having a very dark complexion around his genitals despite the color of the rest of his skin. He also brought jack shit. Bob was elated to be invited to a friendly Thanksgiving dinner, as he wasn't going to be the only person that was difficult to understand that was also attending. For once, he felt seen.
Devian, thank you. And all the other guys, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
The dinner went well, no kerfuffles or calamities causing a disturbance in the force. Bob and the Wack Pack had a delightful meal of turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, creamed spinach, and all of the other fixins. When asked about what he was thankful for, Bob replied his health, his family, and his friends. He was also thankful for being able to see his kids again, even if it was only for a brief period. The man knew what was important and valued what he had. What's stopping you from dropping your pessimistic view of the world? Follow Bob's example, minus the crack smoking. But after this came the grand finale. Bob's tenure on The Howard Stern Show would come to an end with a single appearance in 2007. This was an emotional roller coaster as one of the most notorious members of the Wack Pack had to take his leave. Bob's ability to talk had strengthened over the years. He was actually far easier to understand than when we last saw him during previous interviews. It's good to know that he was still growing as a person and overcoming the things that caused him so much trouble.
I'm Crackhead Bob. I'm going to see Daaaaats. I'm leaving the tape. And, it's dead.
What?
And it's dead.
No, seriously, what are you doing here?
I'm going to see Daaaaats. Because I'm leaving. In more week and more day, I'm leaving.
Bob was leaving the state. It was time for him to spread his wings and move on with his life. He was a little sad, but it was time to move on. In just 8 days, he'd leave the beautiful state of New York and head southwest to begin his latest adventure. Money troubles had plagued Bob for many years, as his current residence was extremely expensive, eating away at his quickly dwindling finances. He also experienced periods of embarrassment from the things he had done on the show. I mean, to be fair, the show was notorious for its use of disabled people in the Wack Pack, its ties to the adult entertainment industry, many controversial celebrities, and everything else in between. The show had gotten him to do some pretty exploitative things. If there was some way for the show to be offensive and seen in a negative light, Howard would jump right at the opportunity. So I get where Bob's coming from. He had also had enough of doing gay stuff for laughs, which I mean, yeah, fair. Bob acknowledged that his disability was a point of contention in his life, as people looked down at him for being part of a program that willingly laughed at those who were less fortunate than the show's hosts and listeners. To the contrary, despite the little bit of embarrassment he felt, he still loved Howard, Robin, and the show. Some of his detractors said that he was a role model in a sense, normalizing the ridicule of people similar to him. It's totally unfair that people judged Crackhead Bob for his participation in the show. Just because he was disabled doesn't mean he couldn't make his own decisions. He was a grown-ass man and he could do whatever he damn well pleased.
All because I'm disabled. And if I do it, everybody will be mad. Everybody will be, I'm disabled and whatever.
You are a table in a sense, but
no.
To call yourself a table.
Says disabled.
Oh, disabled.
Howard.
I thought you said you were a table.
Are those disabled people giving you a hard time? Like you're a role model and you're putting them up to ridicule? Is that what they're saying to you?
And this, sometimes it's just hard for me. Sometimes
you can't take it when the other people complain and say, Bob, you're not doing well.
The right thing.
Yeah.
Well, what are you doing that's so wrong? A lot of the gay stuff got you upset?
I can't do that. I can't do that.
Definitely no gay stuff.
No.
So why the jet hat?
Regardless, Bob's forthcoming destination was Texas. This was going to be a difficult move for him because most of the people that he loved were still in New York. His AA group, his friends, his family, the show, some of the fans, it was all a lot to leave behind. But he was ready for change. Bob was open to appearing on the show again if they'd fly him out, but unfortunately nothing ever came of this. Howard and Robin were in shock from the news, inquiring as to what drew Bob so far from his home. Bob chose Texas because a friend of his had an open room for him. They had previously lived together, with his friend living on the floor just above him, but he said the friend left the state some years ago. Bob, being the trusting guy he is, was set to follow his friend to a strange place to begin anew. At least he wasn't going to be totally alone in the Lone Star Estate. Fans were heartbroken to hear that Bob was leaving, calling into the show to voice their concerns and share their favorite memories of his time on the radio. One fan in particular was choked up, having met Bob at a movie premiere some years prior, adamant that Bob told him that the show was the best thing that ever happened to him, and telling Bob that he shouldn't leave. But times change.
Just you and me.
I'm very upset that the Crackhead. I actually sat next to you at the premiere in New York of Private Parts next to the hooker, and I remember your top hat. In fact, I mean, honestly, you always said that this was the best thing that ever happened to you was being on Stern, and you can't leave us.
Marianne from Brooklyn called in to say goodbye to her dear friend. She was planning to do another Wack Pack Thanksgiving, but unfortunately Crackhead Bob wasn't going to be able to attend. But no worries, he would be there in spirit. She believed that because High-Pitch Eric of all people was capable of landing and holding down a job, at least for a short while, that Bob would be able to do so as well, hoping he'd stick around for a little longer. Another caller, Brian, suggested that they should all roast Crackhead Bob to give him a proper send-off. Turns out Brian started watching and listening to the show because of Bob's appearances and felt the only way to let him leave was to give him one good final round of ribbing. Thankfully, the host decided against this, preferring to let him leave amicably and with good memories. Howard did get the opportunity to tell Bob how much he appreciated him being a part of the show for many years. Stern looked fondly on the past, all of the great memories that were made thanks to Crackhead Bob and his willingness to entertain. After poking a little fun at Bob's manner of talking, Howard said the following: "Dave, Bob, George, who knows what your real name is, but you will always be friend to me." Kinda beautiful in its own way.
I remember that time. Bob, I want to say something serious to you. I'm really sad to see you go to Texas. I know you come on here every once in a while, once in a blue moon. But I am really very grateful that you've been a part of the show all these years. You're a friend. You were always very loyal to me. You certainly always showed up at all my book signings. And as loyal as you are to the Jets and as loyal as you are to this show, it shows that you're a man of character. That when you're passionate about something, you even put a tattoo on your arm to show your passion. So I know your love for this show is very genuine. And I am going to miss you. I understand why you're going to Texas. And if it doesn't work out, well, you come right back here.
You know, you call us from Texas and tell us how you're doing.
Okay. That's right. Dave, Bob, George, who knows what your real name is, but you will always be friend to me.
The show was able to give Bob 2 parting gifts before he left, one being a stiletto portable radio for Sirius Broadcasting with the Sirius service already paid for by the studio, and $500 to help him hit the ground running when he arrived in this new city. The show's host gave him his usual round of needling, poking fun at his mental acuity since they thought he wasn't smart. They wanted to know if he could find Texas on a map. Bob, being the great sport that he is, laughed with the host and hobbled over to the other side of the studio, pointing it out on a map with masterful precision. However, he was unable to identify New Mexico. I'm pretty sure most people couldn't identify it as well. You would be shocked just how many Americans are incapable of correctly labeling the 50 states. Unfortunately, all great stories must come to an end, even the epic tales of titans like Crackhead Bob. On January 18, 2016, Bob was admitted to a hospital due to feeling weak. His father had to assist him in getting the help that he needed, and was going to have his back going forward. Bob was scheduled to have a follow-up visit on the 20th, but he didn't show up, which led his father to checking Bob's apartment. This is where things get really sad. His father found him dead, having died from natural causes. There was nothing indicating foul play or self-harm, so an autopsy was never ordered. The Stern Show announced Bob's passing on the 29th of January, with Howard stating, quote, "He was a huge champion of our show." Stern and his staffers reminisced about Bob's legacy on the air, fondly remembering his difficulty talking and his many, many entertaining visits. Fans of Bob went to social media to share their favorite moments from Bob's tenure on the show. Most of them may not have personally known the man, but they were going to miss him nonetheless. He entertained them for years, and was a beacon of positivity despite the many arduous events that were thrown at him. I've been keeping up with Wack Packers for years, as I believe they're some of the most fascinating and noteworthy people to ever be showcased on television and radio. There's actually more appearances from Bob that I couldn't cover here because of how much longer the video would be, and I'm hoping that this video will inspire you to learn about Bob's story by listening to Stern Show archives, and maybe you'll even take an interest in some of the other fantastic members of Stern's Wack Pack. George Harvey may have been the butt of many jokes and received needless ridicule for what ailed him, but he was a truly loving and caring person. I'd trust him over most people I've met. The world could use more people like him, maybe with a touch less addiction, but the point still stands. Crackhead Bob was one of the shining stars of the classic era of the Howard Stern Show. His story is a snuff of radio legends, and he will never, ever be forgotten. But that being said, that's going to be it for today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.
Take care, Bob. I'm leaving the tape. Out of you all. Bye-bye.